So good morning. We are back to the study of the book Between Heaven and Earth. We started the book last month. We did the introduction plus chapter 1 and 2. Just a recap of what we studied for those that missed. This is the main spirits in this story is Andre Luiz, of course, accompanied by Hilario, who is also present in some other books. The mentor is Clarencio, that if those that read Nosso Lar remember, was the spirit that rescued Andre Luiz from the lower zones, is one of the ministers of Nosso Lar. And then you have Eulalia, who was the person that brought the request to Clarencio. The request is what's called a diverted prayer or a refracted prayer, which is the literal translation from Portuguese, but in English, diverted, it makes more sense a little bit. It is a prayer that a young girl, a 15-year-old girl, Evelina, is sending to her mother, whose name is Odila, that because of the conflicts in her home, she just lost her younger brother, that we're going to find the story on this next couple of chapters. The prayer that goes to her mother cannot be answered because her mother, Odila, is obsessing her stepmother, that we are going to meet at the beginning of this chapter, because she's blaming the stepmother for the death of her son, right? She's in the spiritual world. She's obsessing Zulmira, who is the name of the stepmother of Evelina. But because Evelina is a spirit that was sent from Nosso Lar in a special mission to help and assist those around her, her prayers didn't reach her mother, of course, because the mother is in no condition of receiving the prayer, but it went to a group of spirits responsible for her guardian angel and the other spirits. And because of her urgent request of help and assistance, and because she is deserving of this help and assistance, Eulalia takes to Clarencio, that then invites Andre Luiz and Hilario to go with him to the house. It is very beautiful and very important to understand the importance and the works of a prayer. We studied last month on chapters 1 and 2. For those that missed, I highly recommend you to go back and read chapters 1 and 2 to reinforce the importance and the efficacy and how the prayer works in a general sense. Okay, so now they arrived at the home of Evelina, and that's where we start chapter 3, which is called Obsession, that Zoraida is going to read for us. Okay.
Okay, chapter 3, Obsession. We then went into the largest bedroom in the place, where a young woman was having trouble sleeping. She looked to be about 25. Her tormented face displayed a harmonious beauty. It seemed almost picture perfect, but its comely lines were contrasted by troubled, fearful dark eyes and disheveled hair. Beside her lay a discarded woman. Her head was on a large pillow, as if she was watching over the obviously infirm younger woman. However, the emptiness of her gaze and her dark aura left no doubt that she was inwardly imbalanced. She held her right hand over the younger woman's medulla oblongata, as if wanting to control her nervous impressions, and grayish threads flowed from her head like an octopus tentacles to envelope the other's heart center, annulling her force centers. Both were unaware of our presence, so we were able to observe them closely and see that they were tormentor and victim. In answer to our silent questions, Clarenzo explains. The young woman is Zumila, Amaro's second wife. The discarnate sister who is vampirizing her body is Odelia, Amaro's first wife and Evelina's mother. Odelia has been dolorously transfigured by jealousy, intent on fighting against the one she considers her enemy. She is magnetized to the cerebral area of Zumila's perispirit, controlling the complex network of nerve stimuli and influencing the metabolic centers, thereby profoundly altering the organic landscape. Why doesn't Zumila fight back, I ask? Because she has lapsed into the same vibratorial pattern. She too has devoted herself to her husband with disparaging selfishness. Amaro has always been a very loving father. His first marriage left him 2 children, but little Julio, a handsome boy of 8 years, drowned in the sea. Zumila had a dreadful time trying to bear Amaro's love toward his kids. She constantly whined and complained about the least displays of fatherly tenderness, thereby entwining herself in the frantic energies of Amaro's unaccepting first wife. Due to her sickly preoccupations, Zumila wound up actually wanting one of the children to die. She meant to possess her husband's heart absolutely and exclusively. And because Amaro forced his attention more particularly on the boy, she would silently emit the desire to see him drown at the sea when he went into the water for a swim. One morning, as she was watching over the children, she separated Evelina from her brother and let him go too far out into the water. She got what she wanted. A large wave caught the boy off guard and pushed him to the bottom. Julio couldn't regain his balance and his body floated to the surface. The family's grief was enormous. The railroad worker felt psychically distant from Zumila and thought she had been lax and cruel to the children. Zumila, in turn, was extremely sorry about what had happened and felt indirectly responsible for the disaster. She came under the pernicious influence of her rival, who began obsessing her from the invisible plane.
Okay, let's stop here because I think we were going. We went a little bit further than I would want, but anyway, let's talk. This is the description of an obsession, physically, how it works, mentally, why it happens, the reasons behind. Okay, so let's like Julio used to say, right? Let's try not to get caught up in the drama, in the soap opera, and let's try to focus on the learnings that we can have from this passage. Okay, so they arrive at Evelina's house. Again, Evelina is the main character for us here as a reference because she's the one that sent the prayer and is being helped and assisted. But around her, what's happening? They arrive at a room where the stepmother, who is around 25, is. She seems clearly disturbed. They can see next to her a discarnate woman, who is Odila, right? So you see here how they describe, which is interesting, right? Because we think, where we have a spirit here, where is the spirit in the room? And they describe exactly, Andre Luiz describes exactly where she is, right? Her head was on a large pillow as if she was watching over the infirm younger woman. Okay, so she was there lying on the bed also, right next to the younger woman. Now, the physical connections, right? How one spirit connects to another in a process of obsession. So she had her right hand over the woman's medulla oblongata, which is, Elmo is not here today, right? So, which is in the spine, trying to control her nervous system, right? Now, grayish threads flow from her head like an octopus tentacles to envelop the other's heart center. So that's physically how a process of obsession works. Again, each case is a case, but in this specific case, that's how she was controlling the younger woman, the creating, annulling her four centers through the heart center, which is the center of emotions that comes from our heart, right? Both are unaware of the presence of the more evolved spirits. All the spirits there, Andre Luiz, Hilario, Clarencio, Eulalia, they are all more evolved. So they can make themselves visible to lower order spirits, but if they don't make themselves visible, lower order spirits won't be able to see them. Of course, the incarnate one, unless she's a medium, she won't be able to see them. But the discarnated one, Odila, she can only see them if they make themselves visible to her, that they will do eventually, right? Because that's how they treat her. So then Andre Luiz explains here that the young woman, Zumira, which is Amaro's second wife, and the spirit obsessing is Odila, Amaro's first wife. Odila is jealous of Evelina, of Zumira. That's why she's obsessing, because she started with the jealousy, was able to connect, as we are going to see later, through the behavior of Zumira. She's fighting against the enemy, right? And Andre Luiz asks, eventually, of course, why doesn't Zumira fight back? And the answer, it's the answer that when we talk about obsession, for obsession to happen, the spirit being obsessed needs to open itself to the obsessor. So she lapsed into the same vibratory pattern. That's how she started to become obsessed. And how does she allow to become obsessed? Well, she was jealous of her husband's attention to the two children of the first marriage, especially the young son, little Julio, a handsome boy of 8 years old that drowned in the sea and died. So Zumira had a difficult time dealing with Amaru's love towards the kids. She was always complaining. We don't need to be very imaginative to understand the type, right? We deal with so many jealous people in our lives, and we see that, we know that jealous people are very selfish and think that they have the right to everything. They have the right to all the attention of especially of the ones that they have affection for. So she was constantly complaining about Amaro's attention to especially to the young boy, and she secretly desired that the boy would die so she could have Amaro's attention to her only. And the desire was for him to drown on the beach where they usually go. That was the unconscious desire that she was having. And one morning, when she was alone with the boy, she allowed the boy to wander by himself without supervision, and the boy ended up going to the sea, and a large wave caught him, and he ended up being drowned. Of course, you can imagine that the father's grief was enormous. The result was exactly the opposite of what Zumira wanted. Instead of having his attention towards her, he distanced himself from her because he blamed her for not taking good care of the son. She blamed her for him losing the son. And she almost immediately start regretting her actions and start feeling indirectly responsible for the disaster. Here is very important for us to understand that she didn't kill the boy. She wanted the boy to die and was careless in taking care of him, but she didn't kill the boy. Okay, it's a important distinction here as we go further into this book, right? Uh, Desiring is one thing, acting is a completely different thing. She didn't act. She just allowed him to wander without uh, taking good care of him, and that end up causing the accident and the drowning. Okay. Again, the human laws have difference of intention. If she was going to be um, uh, she was going to go to the courts for the death of the boy, she would be not be guilty of killing the boy. It will be at most involuntary. I think it's manslaughter. I don't know if that's the right term, or involuntary something that carry a sentence here, but it's not really like you intentionally killed someone. Okay. Any questions here? Any comments? This is a process of obsession. It's important for us to understand the process, how it works. Elmo, I know you arrived late, but you want to talk a little bit about this part that the physical process of the obsession. I mentioned that the medulla oblongata is in the spine. Is it correct?
Well, the medulla oblongata, we could consider being the very, very, very beginning of the spine. Well, not the spine, of the spinal cord, but it's still part of the brain. It's part of the so-called the lower brain. It's where it has most of the nerves that comes outside to go to, especially for the heart, for the respiratory centers. But it's you can say it is extremely very beginning of the spine column, of the spine, not spine column. I don't know how far you went into talking about obsession, which we're going to discuss in the Miriam's book.
But you can talk about it. I covered a little bit what is highlighted there and the process a little bit, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the first
So
thing
it's
that
good to have more information.
The first thing that I think is very important to demystify, at least amongst the Brazilian spiritists, the idea of an obsession being an evil spirit causing harm to someone else, which is not the case. Okay, an obsession is a consistent, persistent influence of one spirit upon another, not necessarily evil. Yes, it could be out of passion. It could be a sick love, if one would say, which I don't like the word love associated with anything negative. I think passion is the right word. On this particular case, an obsession will be subdivided just for didactics into simple, fascination, and subjugation. Subjugation being the one with the strongest association. In this particular case, I think it's early to say exactly where does it fall, but if it's not yet, it's moving towards a subjugation. Because what really defines subjugation is complete loss of the free will, of the willpower of the one being obsessed. We don't know yet if that's the case, but if it's not, it's moving in that direction. It's very deep. It's affecting directly her physical body, like everything else will affect eventually the physical body, because the persistent bombardment of dark energies in the perispirit eventually will affect the physical body. Okay, that seems to be the case, because at the very beginning, Clarencio or Andre Luiz makes the comment that is a good-looking, apparently physically good-looking woman, but you already see the traces of a, if not a depression, at least a melancholy, something that already leads to see the decline of the physical strength in that woman.
Also, just talking about obsession, right? It's important. We mentioned this several times, but the types of obsession Elmo mentioned, but the process of obsession can happen between discarnate spirit obsessing an incarnate spirit, which is the most common. It's the one that we always think about, is the first one that we think about, but that's not the only one. It can happen from a discarnate to another discarnate, as we see in some of Andre Luiz books, right? We just finished Liberation. There were processes of obsession there from in the spiritual world, in Gregorio's place in the lower zones. It can happen from an incarnate to another incarnate. It's an example, you know, a couple where one complete dominates the other, controls every aspect of the other partner life. That's an obsessive behavior from incarnate to incarnate. So it can be from an incarnate to a discarnate. Example, you lose a loved one and you cannot let it go. You obsess on the remembrance, on the connections. You don't allow the discarnate to move on with their life there back in the spiritual world. You kind of tie the discarnate to you through this obsessing thoughts. And then you have reciprocal obsession, which is where both one obsess the other, which is we see one case on Andre Luiz's book, Domain of Mediumship, when the woman goes to the spiritist center to treat the obsessor. They separate her from the obsessor during the mediumship meeting, and immediately she goes back home. She goes to sleep. When she wakes up, she goes rushing towards the obsessor to reconnect with the obsessor. So this is a reciprocal obsession. And the last one, which is less talked about, is self-obsession. You can obsess yourself with the mono ideas or ideas of excessive worried and things like that. Okay, so just to recap the types of obsession. But here again, we are talking about the most common case of obsession, a discarnate over an incarnate. Andre Luiz, of course, always asking why doesn't she fight back. Andre Luiz is a man of action, as we know, and he has always, which is important because his reactions are most likely our reactions that if we were in his same situation, and it's important for us to learn when to act and when not to act. And we'll see more examples on this case, especially later in this chapter. Again, for an obsession to happen, you have to enter into the same vibratory level, and that's what Zulmira entered and allowed to Odila to connect. Odila wouldn't be able to find Zulmira if Zulmira was living a normal life as a stepmother, taking care of the kids, taking care of the husband, living a normal, positive life. Again, imperfect as we are all imperfect, but a normal life. her vibrational level would not allow Odila to connect. Odila would be looking around and trying to influence, but would be able to be very not very effective in influencing. Obsessing would not be possible, but even influencing would be not possible that much. Okay. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, the other thing to reinstate is that it's a relationship, and it's established a relationship. And in this relationship, you can't point fingers in the one is guilty, the one is innocent. But you can say they are both responsible. Each one carries his own responsibility. And if you're going to say this, use the word guilty, then both sides are guilty. Okay? And we should not stress on this guilt thing, but think in terms of responsibilities. What is my responsibility in this relationship? What is the responsibility of each one of the parts in that relationship? Because it's by taking care of our responsibilities that we elevate our vibrations to the point that if the other side does not seek to improve, you vibrate at a higher level that you will not be able to be attacked by those who choose not to make changes.
Yes, Soraya.
Okay. We start at the feeling, right?
Clarencio paused a moment.
Yes, okay. Clarencio paused a moment and then continued. The feeling of guilt is always a collapse of the conscience, and dark forces make their appearance through it. Because of her destructive remorse, Zumila fell to Odilia's emotional level, and both became locked in a deadly fuel, unseen by ordinary human eyes. It is a case where earthly medicine is completely ineffective. The minister finished his explanation. As if she registered our presence intuitively, Odilia latched onto the poor woman more forcefully and shouted, "No one shall free her. I'm a wretched mother who's been robbed of a home. I have taken justice into my own hands." And staring at Zumila with a dreadful look, she added, "Murderer, murderer, you killed my child. You too shall die." Zumila opened her eyes wide. Her face was extremely pale. She had not heard what her invisible enemy said, but enlaced in her magnetic wave, she felt like she was about to die. Clarencio stroked her forehead and said quietly, "Poor girl." Hilario and I instinctively rushed Odilia to pull her away, but the benevolent instructor stopped us with a gesture, warning, "Force won't do any good. The two are completely interconnected. Separating them from forceful could cause harm of unforeseeable consequences." The discarded woman's exasperation would weigh too heavily on Zumila's cerebral centers, and lipotomy could lead to paralysis or even death. "Then how can this wrongly union be undone?" cried Hilario. "How could it be brought to an end? Wouldn't it be right to remove obsessor from victim?" Clarencio smiled and replied, "This situation is different. On the physical plane, the body is a priceless isolator of the unbalanced energies of our mind. However, on our plane, and with this type of problem, such energies can overflow menacingly onto the unfortunate woman, whose body is like a weak lamp, which, if it were to receive too strong of an electric current, would be rendered completely inoperable." "Can we do anything at all?" asked Hilario, disheartened. "We need to exert our influence on Zumila's thoughts because she's the one who initiated the persecution in the first place. It's crucial to set her will on a different course, shifting her mental center and providing her with other interests and aspirations." "So can we get started?" the minister calmly replied. "Not right now. We couldn't and we wouldn't know how. Preparation is indispensable." "Surely a good scolding wouldn't hurt," replied Hilario. "Yes, a pure and simple bit of counseling might be appropriate, but we mustn't forget that the victim's cerebral organization is taking a serious beating. Our intervention in Odilia's spiritual field has to be safe and secure in order to avoid shocks and countershocks. because they would reverberate disastrously on each other. Being too gentle would be harmful. Being too forcefully would be bruising. Lorenzo looked compassionately at the two women and continued, "This is a very delicate situation. We need to find someone who has amassed enough love and understanding in his or her soul to converse with the two using the creative power of renewal." He thought for a few instants and concluded, "I think we can count on Sister Clara. Let's ask her to help us. She'll be able to change Odelia with her light-crowned words and incline her to work on her conversion. For now, all you and I can do is provide a little relief, nothing more." He asked Eulalia to provide Evelina with some much-needed mental relief, and then applied a lengthy series of calming magnetic passes to Sulima. As if gently anesthetized, Zulmira went from being troubled to feeling at peace. Her husband came into the room and, thinking she was asleep, settled her more comfortably on the pillow.
Okay, thanks, Zoraida.
Okay.
Let's go back here. We started. Again, Elmo talked about responsibility, and then Clarencio immediately talks about guilt. The feeling of guilt is always a collapse of the conscience and attract the dark forces, right? Again, guilt is a sentiment that can paralyze us. We need to learn to actively repair the errors that are causing the guilt sentiments, because guilt in itself is the beginning of the process of recovery. But if we stop there on the feeling of guilt, we become paralyzed and we can go into more serious issues. And here, Clarencio describes very well collapse of the conscience and dark forces. And then he talks about the remorse, the guilt that allowed Odila to connect to Zulmira, and they lock themselves in a battle that cannot be seen by ordinary human eyes, right? And he says very appropriate that earthly medicine is completely ineffective because it doesn't know how to deal with the spiritual side of it, right? And then he talks about Odila's noticing that something was going on and reinforcing her attack on Zulmira, calling her murderer. And it's interesting, right? Because if you think Odila, first thing when you read this, Odila is in the spiritual world. Her young son just went back to the spiritual world also, by way of drowning, right? And why isn't she trying to help her son? Why she's obsessed with Zulmira? You clearly see here that her focus is more on the family that she left behind than the son. Because if the focus was her son, she would be looking for him, trying to find him and help him. So the son is the excuse she uses to attack Zulmira and the house there, right? And of course, Andre Luiz and Hilario, the students, when they see the attack, they immediately rush to Odila to separate. And but Clarencio, of course, that knows better, tells them force won't do any good. The two are completely interconnected, and forcing them to be separate can cause unforeseeable consequences. One thing that is important here, when we talk about exorcism as practiced by the Catholic Church, why doesn't exorcism work? Because you can temporarily separate a spirit from an incarnate, but if you don't solve the issue, the obsession, which is the cause that the exorcism is trying to solve will come back. Or there are more serious consequences. He says here that the connections are too heavily on Zulmira's cerebral centers, and if you forcefully disconnect them, you could cause paralysis or even death on Zulmira. There is a very famous case of Dr. Bezerra de Menezes that had many kids, but one of his sons were deeply obsessed, was subjugated, which is the most extreme cause of obsession, and Dr. Bezerra de Menezes was trying, still incarnate, was trying to help the son, and he was told in a mediumship meeting that if the separation would happen, his son would die because he was too connected to the obsessor, and they were so much further down the road that separation would cause his physical strength to disappear, and he would die. And Dr. Bezerra de Menezes decided that it was more important for his son to be free, even if he went back to the spiritual world, because that would be better for him, and that's what really happened. So we see here how dangerous it is for forceful measures. It needs to be, both need to be treated in a serious and effective way, but slowly and carefully. And of course, Andre Luiz is complaining how this can we brought this to an end, and Clarencio explains, talks about the body, that the body is a priceless isolator of the imbalanced energies of our mind. So even if our mind become, and that's something we mentioned here, the incarnation is important, because even when we are completely disturbed of our mind, we need to sleep, we need to eat, we need to try to live a life. So that's the isolator that our physical body allows us to have. Now on the spiritual plane, as Clarencio says here, the energies overflow from one spirit, because the spirit has nothing else to worry about but just the obsession. And the unfortunate woman, the incarnate one, if she was to receive a very strong electric current, meaning the separation and the blocking these energies, she will be rendered completely inoperable, meaning she would suffer very serious physical consequences. And then Hilario gets frustrated and says, "Why can't we do anything at all?" And then Clarencio explains, the one that initiated the process was Zulmira, so you have to start with her. It's important to set her on a different course, meaning we have to deviate her attention. That's something we sometimes in our mediumship meetings, when we are talking to spirits that are obsessing with persecuting someone, we try to ask them to change their thought process, to deviate, to move away from these thoughts of only thinking about one spirit that they are persecuting. Provide them with other interests and aspirations. Doesn't mean they are going to forget, because you cannot forget the problem. You have to deal with the problem. But once you have other interests and other aspirations, and the problem becomes just one of other issues in your mind, and you can receive appropriate treatment. Clarencio says here, which is very interesting, Clarencio is one of the ministers of Nosso Lar, not any spirit, but he said, we couldn't or wouldn't know how to deal. Preparation is indispensable. And then, of course, Hilario doesn't give up. Can we give her a good scolding? And Clarencio says, a little bit of counseling might be appropriate. But we need to remember both. The victim's cerebral organization is taking a serious beating. So what he says here, this phrase is very beautiful. Being too gentle will be harmful. Being too forceful will be bruising. Again, the option is always the middle way, right? You cannot be too gentle, but you cannot be too forceful. You need to approach with the right with the right amount of influence. And of course, he talks about that they need someone that has enough love and understanding in his or her soul to talk with the two using the creative power of renewal. And then he mentions Sister Clara, that she thinks that Clara will be able to change Odila with her words, light crown words, and incline her to work on her conversion. But for the moment, all they can do is provide a little relief. So they treat Evelina a little bit, with Eulalia provides Evelina with some mental relief. And they are treat also, they apply some magnetic passes to Zulmira. Again, spirits applying magnetic passes. Okay, so there are spiritual and magnetic passes, and they are applying, in this case, magnetic passes to Zulmira. And she recovers a little bit. She starts to feel at peace, and then the husband Amaro comes to the room and settles her. Okay. Elmo, anything to add here?
Yeah, if we go back to the previous page and see the, well, first of all, Hilario and Andre Luiz are like young bulls, right? Like full of testosterone and no brain in that particular scenario, right? I mean, they want to get things done, but have no idea. Is the proverbial revolutionary, right? Knows that something is wrong, wants to fix it, but have no idea how to do it. And then there is the illuminist, who knows something is wrong, wants to fix it, and have the know how to do it. That would be Clara, right? And you see the humility, the experience of Clarence to say, hey, this is too much for us. You know, not even I, as Ron said, the guy is a minister of something in Osula. It's not an average though. And he'll say here, not even I can handle this. We need someone, and someone who has what? Who has amazed enough love and understanding. There's two things important here. We have amazed or have conquered enough love, but not only that is necessary, because all three of them may have enough love, but there is something, the understanding. And the understanding is the intelligence of their heart here that he's mentioned, because in his or her soul, right? It's not just the intellectual knowledge, but the intelligence of the soul. Someone who has enough love and enough understanding to manage the situation. That takes humility of someone to say, this is where I have to stop and call for help. This is where I need to exercise prudence and let someone with great experience to manage the situation. I think this is perhaps the most important thing in this chapter of this second reading, is to have this humility, this humbleness, to know when it's time to stop and get someone to take over, because someone is better prepared to manage a situation, which is not the case of course, of Andre Luiz and Hilario at that moment. Full of energies and not enough love, not enough understanding. That's why they say, hell is full of good intentions. Good intention by itself is not enough.
Thanks, Elmo. Anyone else? Okay. this is the end of this chapter. These are small chapters, so we can always do 2 chapters a month. So let's start chapter 4.
Okay. A pathway of trials. Zumila had left her body, but she was now really enjoying the peace portrayed on her face. Enlaced by Odelia, to whose controlling gaze she submitted, she did not register our presence. With obvious signs of dread, she heard her rivals rebuke, accusing her. What did you do to my son? Murderer, murderer. You shall pay dearly for intruding into the home that is mine and only mine. I'm going to wreck your life. You're not going to rob me of Omaro's love. I will arm Evelina's heart against you. No, no, responded her victim. I didn't murder him. I didn't. Liar, I read your thoughts, your desires, your vows. Sumila unexpectedly escaped Odelia's grasp and ran out. Odelia ran after her. Lorenzo remarked, whenever the poor thing does not manage to calm her body down, she falls into this troubling nightmare. Let's follow them. They've headed for the beach where the boy drowned. Hard pressed by our imbalanced sister's assault, Sumila hasn't been able to free herself from her afflictive memories. We too headed for the beach, for the sea. Sorry. On the way, we engage in a lively conversation. I can't see why Zumila claims she's innocent, said Hilario. Why such a trial if she isn't the one who committed the crime? I asked in turn. The minister explained. According to Sister Eulavia's records, Zumila didn't actually commit the crime, but because she was insanely jealous toward her husband, she ardently longs for the boy's death and even encouraged it. Not to repeat myself, I'm briefly explain the couple's troubled past in as much detail as possible.
Okay. So not much here, but then we go into a long part. So that's why I decided to stop here. So Zumira is sleeping, leaves her physical body. When we sleep, we disconnect from our, well, not really disconnect, but we separate momentarily from our physical body. But she's, of course, doesn't find peace because she's enlaced by Odila, who accuses her, what you did to my son, murder, murder, you shall pay. Again, what I mentioned before, she's really focused much more on Amaro's. You see, she says here, you're not going to rob me of Amaro's love. So she's using the son as an excuse to separate Zumira from Amaro. And she said that she's going to use Evelina's heart. And Zumira tries to defend herself. I didn't murder him. I didn't. But again, spirits that are vibrating on the same level, a spirit can read the thoughts. That's why I marked here. I read your thoughts, your desires, your vows. So Dila could read Zumira's thoughts. We are surrounded by spirits. We vibrate at a certain level. Spirits that vibrate at a certain level, that want to read our thoughts, can read our thoughts. More evolved spirits can read our thoughts if they want. Less evolved spirits cannot read our thoughts because they need to be on the same vibration. Now, it's important to remember, not all spirits that are around us are reading our thoughts because they are not interested. You know, the example I always give is you walk down Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, there are 100 people that you cross on one block, you hear them talking, and after one block you don't remember anything you heard from anyone because you were not focused, interested, or paying attention. That's how spirits are around us. They're not really interested in us unless there's something particular that they care. And this is the case. So this is why Odila is able to read the thoughts, see the desires, the vows, and is blaming Zumira's for killing her son, Julio, right? And then they go to the sea where everything happened, so we can see a description of everything that has happened there. But before that, Hilario asks, why is Zumira claiming that she's innocent? And Andre Luiz asks, why such a trial if she's the one that committed the crime? So Clarencio explains, Zumira didn't actually commit the crime, but because she was insanely jealous towards her husband, she ardently longed for the boy's death and even encouraged it. So she is indirectly responsible for the death of the boy. Again, we are going to see all the side of the boy later, because of course the boy didn't die by accident, not being at fault, right? He was in his incarnation blueprints that he was going to die young, because we will see that later, and I'm not going into detail. But of course, the death of the boy has something to do with his own karma, his own necessities, right? And then Clarencio said that he's going to explain in much detail as possible. Okay. Comments, questions here? Anything here, Elmo? No.
Yeah, of course, Zumira is guilty of negligence. I think a halfway decent lawyer would win easily this case on a prosecution towards negligence. Okay, if she was placed in the responsibility of taking care of the child while the other adults were away, then she was negligent. Okay. The boy, Julio, of course, as an eternal spirit, has its responsibility and has its blueprint, but it does not give Zumira a free pass to be negligent. Okay, so Zumira carries the responsibilities regardless of what is the blueprint of the incarnation for the spirit, for this young man and Julio.
Okay. Go ahead, Soraya.
Okay. After a slight pause, he proceeded. Amaro loved his son immensely. Whenever Julio became ill, Amaro would stand at his bedside, showing unlimited tenderness. Realizing that Zumira didn't really love his kids, he began sleeping beside the boy, surrounding him with attention. When he came home from work each day, he would have long talks with the boy, would read him stories, or would listen attentively to his childish tales. They were like two old buddies who were quite enough for each other. Consequently, Zumira shabbed with spite and began to see the boy as an enemy of her domestic happiness. Evelina's devotion to her father didn't bother her as much. She was sweeter and more reserved. She showed restraint in her displays of love toward her father, and she divided her kindness to include her stepmother. So Zumira didn't hold anything against Evelina. Julio, on the other hand, enraged her. In his extreme attachment to Amaro, he would get into mischief, but Amaro would always forgive him with a benevolent smile. Bit by bit, Zumira allowed hate to occupy her heart, and she let her jealousy blind her to the point of longing for the happy little boy's death. She intentionally unconcerned herself with offering him the help she should have, and she abandoned him to the extravagances that were characteristic of his age, as she felt the secret desire to see him meet his end. She even encouraged him to play in the street, hoping that some vehicle would do what she didn't have the guts to do with her own hands. Such was her attitude when she went with the family for their morning swim on that clear, sunny morning. Involved with the contentment of the outing, Amaro and the girl went out a little ways in a small boat while Zumira watched the boy. That is when dark musings arose in her mind. Might this be a good time to carry out her purposes? What if she were to just leave the boy to himself? Of course, because of his infantile curiosity, Julio wouldn't resist going out into the water. No one could blame her. She put her plan in action and left the boy alone. Seeing that he was by himself, Julio became highly interested in the colorful shells in the sand and wound up looking for them in the water until a huge wave smashed into his frail body and forced him down. He came up and cried for her help. Zulmira could not have gone back the short distance to save him, could have gone back the short distance to save him, but overcome by the sinister thoughts dominating her mind, she waited for the sea to finish the dreadful deed that she had not had the courage to do. When she saw that the boy had disappeared, she began crying out for help. Her soul was suddenly gripped by remorse, but it was too late. Amaro came running, and with the help of friends, he pulled the lifeless body out of the water. Grief-stricken, he wept bitterly at the loss of the boy and blamed Zulmira. That was when, overcome with repentance and tormented by guilt, she descended in the spirit to vibratorial level of Odelia, who, repulsed by silently being watching her. If she had been able to maintain peace of conscience, she could have defended herself against the unseen onslaught as if she was living in a fortified castle. But because she condemned herself, she slid into deplorable perturbation, like someone who had deserted a well-lit home and had gotten lost in a forest of darkness.
Thanks. It's a long passage here that I didn't highlight anything because it's really describing Clarencio describing what happened, right? First, Amaro noticing his second wife's little care for his children from the first marriage. He started, and he had a very good relationship with the boy. He loved the boy. He started sleeping with the boy in the room. He gave all his attention to the boy. That only caused Zulmira's jealousy to increase. Again, we see an evolved spirit here, which is Evelina. How did she behave, right? A more evolved spirit than the other ones around. Zulmira didn't hold anything against Evelina. Why? Because Evelina's devotion to her father didn't bother her much because Evelina was sweeter, more reserved. She showed restraint in her displays of love toward the father and divided her kindness to include her stepmother. So Evelina was the only one in the house that knew how to deal with the whole situation. The stepmother not really caring much for the children, the father trying to protect the children, or especially the son, from the stepmother without also understanding the necessity of, because he was married, he had to pay attention to his wife as much as the children, and he would have to be the buffer between the boy and the stepmother. Evelina didn't need that because she's more evolved than all of those around her. But the boy needed. He was there as also as a spirit that, especially a young boy, he wants all the attention he can. And he's also playing, and Amaro was always excusing him and forgiving him. That only enraged Zulmira even more. So what happens that Zulmira allows hatred to grow into her heart, and she starts to wishing that the boy would disappear from their lives, so she could have her husband's back to her, theoretically, right? So when they went to the beach that day, she said a good opportunity to carry the plan, meaning she would allow the boy to play by himself and hope for something to happen to him. This is in Rio de Janeiro. The beaches in Rio are very, very beautiful, very nice, but the sea is very strong, and it's very dangerous if you don't take care of yourself. It's a very good beach for surfing. Most of the beaches in Rio, but Copacabana, Ipanema, the famous ones, it's dangerous by the sea. very strong waves. So Zulmira could have saved him when he was caught by the sea, but she didn't make any effort. And eventually what happened, when it happened, immediately she started feeling remorse, but then it was too late. Amaro came running to help, and you know, he was, of course, he had a strong attachment to the boy, so he was grief-stricken, and Zulmira, then tormented by guilt, she went into the vibratory level of Odila, who could then connect to her, because Odila has been observing without having the ability to influence. But when Zulmira entered into this guilty sentiments, that's when she opens the door for Odila to connect and to start the obsessive process. And she went into the perturbation. The example he gives here, Clarencio gives here, which is very interesting, someone who had deserted a well-lit home and had gotten lost into the forest of darkness. That's what happened into Zulmira's mind. Okay? Now, anything here?
Yeah, we see here the law of action, reaction of cause and consequence. We see here why Xavier would say that when you send some negativities towards someone else, you send the copy and keep the original. You see that cycle that created here, that it started Zulmira's jealousy towards the husband. The more she is jealous and start to create this hate-like towards the boys, the more Amaro distance himself from her and spend more time, approximate more and more with the boy, because he's trying to fill that gap that should be there. That should be the responsibility of the stepmother, right? Since she's not doing it, he feels that void. And by feeling that void, he needs to take some time that could be dedicated to her and stay away. And then he created that cycle. The more she does that, the more he'll do, Amaro will do, he's created devotion to the boy, and they'll create even more jealousy, more hate towards the boy, and you see this cascade going on, this cycle, that if it's not broken at some point, we could expect it would lead to some kind of a disaster. So some big consequences as we see over here. So that's why we need to cut those things early enough before you reach that level. It's a cycle that she put herself on, that she initiated, that she created. Having her fulfilled her responsibility as a stepmother, then Amar would not have to fill that void to take care of the boy emotionally and everything else.
But it's interesting, right? That Evelina there in the middle, it doesn't get contaminated by all this plays, right? Except feeling, you know, feeling the pain and asking for help, but she's rising above the contamination of the ambient.
Yeah, just by the fact that she's the one praying and asking for assistance for the stepmother shows that she is at least a couple of steps above the rest in that house on in this scenario.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Raida?
Yes. Lorenzo paused briefly to rest and then continued. From that day onward, the poor woman lost both her domestic bliss and her own peace of mind. She and her husband may live under the same roof, but it is as though they are complete strangers. But isn't Zulmira actually guilty before the law? I asked. The wise mentor smiled meaningfully and replied, no, not in the real sense of the law. However, looking at us more expressively than usual, he continued, even so, Who among us is not responsible for our thoughts? Our intentions either attenuate or aggravate our wrongs. Our desires are congealed mental energies that materialize our actions, which basically constitute the true arena in which we live our lives. The fruits speak for the trees that produce them. Within the real living realm of our conscience, our deeds shout loudly about who we are. The shape of our thoughts gives shape to our destiny. Hilario and I listen in rapture, unable to even blink, waiting for a clear intuition about what to do right now. Clarenzo, not to get lost in philosophical digressions, we took the central thread of the matter. Julio's trials included an early death. He was a reincarnated suicide. Amaro's second wife, however, suffers as a result of the unfortunate choices she harbored within her mind. She also suffers from the poisonous vibrations that she shot at Julio. Because of her jealousy, she surrounded herself with pestilential environment in which her malign thoughts prospered, just as a piece of rotten fruit nourishes the worms that devour it. Believing herself to be responsible for the child's death, she had, after all, fostered the criminal plan. Zumira gave into her own evil and also linked herself magnetically to her adversaries, thus becoming sick and demented. What about the boy in all this? I asked. Julio was taken to a suitable place, but can Odilia go to him and find out the whole truth? Unfortunately, the poor thing's genetic center is completely out of control, and that prevents her from seeing things more clearly. She wants nothing but her husband due to her maddening attachment to the ties of sex, which her passion only perverts. Odilia does possess admirable moral qualities, but they are eclipsed for the first being. She discarnated in the prime of her femininity, bereft of a religious faith that could re-educate her impulses, hence her super excitation. However, such a state is only temporary, and we hope she will willingly submit to the treatment of an upcoming readjustment. When her situation improves, I think the problem will have an immediate and constructive solution. I was going to ask another question, but we had reached the beach, and Clarenzo said that we should observe.
Okay, so few things here. Clarenzo talks about what happened to Zumira after that day, right? That she loses her peace of mind. She and Amaro start living under the same roof as complete stranger. And then Andre Luiz asks, but isn't Zumira guilty before the law? And Clarenzo replies, no, not in the real sense of the law. The real sense of the law, the natural law. And then he continues, who among us is not responsible for our thoughts? And then that's very important. Our intentions either attenuate or aggravate our wrongs. Our desires are congealed mental energies that materialize our actions, which basically constitute the true arena in which we live our lives. Within the living realm of our conscience, our deeds shout loudly about who we are. The shapes of our thoughts give shape to our destiny. Everything starts with our thought. Thought is matter. When with the thoughts come our intentions. With our intentions can attenuate or aggravate our wrongs, depending on what we do, right? That's where we build our lives. Within our conscience, right? We tell spirits, more evolved spirits can see who we really are and what we are doing, the shape that we are giving to our destiny through our thoughts. Again, everything in the future is open for us to choose what we are going to do with our lives. We are building our futures every day at every moment. And our thoughts are the beginning of the process. Thoughts, again, are matter and are sent out in the world, the billions and billions of thoughts of all the spirits surrounding Earth, all together at the same time, connecting to each other according to their vibrational levels and their necessities. But going back to the case in itself, right? He explains here that Julio's trials included an early death, a reincarnated suicide. What does that mean? One of the things that happens to suicides is that they come to a new incarnation to complete the time that they were supposed to be living in the previous existence, and they didn't complete through the suicide. So in the case of Julio, he probably committed suicide around 8 years before he was supposed to end the previous physical life, and that's the time he has left to come on this new incarnation and have an early death. It's very important for us not to think that this happens all the time with all the suicides, okay? This is one of the hypotheses of the process of repairing the harm caused by suicide. So, you know, you can come in a very short physical life, or you can come with a life where you're going to face the same challenges that caused you to commit suicide. So for you to be tempted and overcome, you know, for those that died very late in the process, meaning that you commit suicide because you are dying of a disease, and you were suffering too much, and then you commit suicide 6 months before you were supposed to die. One of the possibilities is for you to come on a pregnancy that's never going to come to term, and you end up with a miscarriage that completes your 6 months, which is an expiation for both you and the parents. Again, not abortion, miscarriage here, very important. Okay. So she's Zulmira here sends this poisonous vibration to Julio, surrounds herself with the environment, damaging her environment, allowing Odila to connect to her. And she connected to Odila with her own poisonous thoughts. And then, you know, Andre Luiz asked, what about Julio? Where did he go? And we are going to see later in this book, where did he go? There is a colony for children in the spiritual world, for this type of children, because clearly Julio, at this age, and with these problems that he has, he's not going to go back to the spiritual world and become the old spirit that he was. He will continue to be the same age, exactly same age that he died. So he's going to a colony in the spiritual world that takes care of children. And we are going to visit this colony later in this book. It's a very beautiful passage that we are going to meet another mother that lost one of her sons, and during the sleep she's going to visit her son in this spiritual colony for children, where Julio is there struggling also. And we'll see more, but there is a lot more there. And then Andre Luiz, of course, asks, why can't Odila go to him and find out what really happened, the whole truth? And Clarencio says, again, she's very focused on her former husband. The sexual desires prevents her from thinking different, right? We carry our addictions back to the spiritual world, any addiction, and we try to fulfill them, associating ourselves to those that are victims of the same addictions that we have. But one thing that Clarencio says is very important: Odila has admirable moral qualities. Remember what I almost said in the beginning. She's not evil. She's just obsessed with these thoughts. She's not persecuting others for the pleasure of persecuting others. No, it's all in her own mind, disturbed mind of jealousy, of addiction to sex, of trying to get vengeance over someone that she thinks is in her way, the same way Zulmira thought that Julio was the obstacle to her happiness. Odila thinks that Zulmira is the obstacle to her happiness, so she wants to separate Zulmira from Amaro without really thinking clearly that even if she succeeded in separating Zulmira from Amaro, she cannot, she's discarnated, Amaro is incarnated. What she can do with Amaro? Amaro would live his life and she wouldn't be able to reconnect. So Clarencio see that because she has admirable moral qualities, when her situation improves, the problem will have an immediate and constructive solution. It's not a difficult problem to deal with. It's just she needs to refocus her thoughts, her energies, and her desires. And that's basically the end of the chapter. Elmo, anything to add here? Elmo, you're there?
Oh, sorry, it's muted.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, I don't know if it's wrong or not, it's correct or not, but when it says genetic center, I think the right word would be genesic.
Genesic, yes. Where is it?
When it says about Zulmira's sexual problems there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it says the very top.
Oh, okay.
Reporting genetic
Yeah,
center.
not genesic. Yeah, that's wrong.
Yeah, it should be genesic, which is related to sex, that's related to reproduction, and not to the genetics of the the body.
I didn't know. It's a very good catch. It's the lowest chakra, right? The one that
is the lowest, the sacral genesic center.
Yeah.
That is responsible for, the instinct of preservation of our own genetic pool or reproduction that require sex in our species, right? But that needs to be brought above the belt, so to say, had to be sublimized into the heart to be used properly. It is important, we need it, it's very good. If it was not good, God would not give it to us. But it needs to be educated, has to be sublimized, brought above the belt, as I like to say, to be used properly, to be a great instrument in creativity, because it's also related to creation, creativity as well. So when those energies are properly used, they are very good, very important, and very useful in our moral progress as well. So it's not something bad, okay? On the contrary, but needs to be educated. And unfortunately, she is, again, I like the word victim, but she's almost some kind of a victim of a system that castrates the opportunity to educate, to find means to control the energies in that center. And when this is not educated, or when it's, what is the word? Unbalanced, it's not the word that I'm looking for. It may lead to vices. It may lead to deviations of what it is, how it is meant to be used. And it seems that is her case, right? But you have to bring the sex or the genesis, those energies, just not only to the act itself, but have the absolute control of the partner as well. That creates jealousy in some cases. Okay, so of course she's responsible for everything that she does, but in that you can see our responsibility as a society to provide properly education, to not discuss things like sex things, so people would have means, tools to work their problems, which doesn't seem the case. And Clarence says that due to religion things over there. Julius' death, I think I have to reinforce what João has said. Yeah, we just covered the chapter of looking ahead and seeing the future. I have that plan there. Perhaps we would have that plan to discard it at a younger age, 8, 9, 10, and that is not a number to it. Okay. But whatever is Julius' responsibilities, it does not give a free pass to anyone to be neglectful, to be or to accelerate in any possible way the discarnation of anyone whatsoever. Okay, if Julio was really meant to discarnate at that age or so, that was the blueprint and the plan, and it would be around there, it would happen. But hopefully it would happen with no one being responsible for it in any possible way, because no one comes here with that plan to be responsible to shorten the discarnation of anyone in any situation.
Okay. Yes. And again, he would very likely died without, by an accident, by a disease or something like that, without anyone being responsible, if it was supposed to happen. Okay. Any last questions, comments? All right. So
John,
yes,
and
Carol.
may I ask a question?
Sure.
Yes, this is Carol. Yes, does an obsessor in the spirit world know or have the abilities or know where they will target their obsessed individual, whether it be in the spirit world or the physical world? In other words, are they guided to do that, or do they know, or can they see where they really want that energy to link? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, if I understood your question. Some spirits that have more intellectual abilities may know exactly where to aim and how to do the work. Some spirits that doesn't, and the case of Odila here, she's not an evil spirit and she doesn't sound very intellectually evolved. It's an instinctive action that connects her, and the way the mechanics of the process is all instinctive. It's not conscious. She connects and attacks where she wants, what she wants to attack of Zulmira instinctively. It's not consciously. She doesn't know exactly the details of what she has to do to connect to the medulla oblongata. No, this is all she connects instinctively, and the forces, the thought, and the process take place by themselves. All right, Elmo?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Oh, thank you, John. Thank you, Elmo. Appreciate that.
So can you do our final prayer, Carol? Well, before we do it, next Sunday, Mother's Day, we are going to study very appropriately the Gospel according to Spiritism, right? Which is always important, especially on Mother's Day. Okay, so you're all invited for next Sunday. Okay, Carol, can you do our final prayer?
Oh, sure. Thank you, John and Elmo and everyone for participating. Thank you, Sarita, for reading for us today. Infinite Creator and Supreme Intelligence, we give thanks for the opportunity again to be together for our studies today of the book Between Heaven and Earth. We know that obsession is an energetic two-way agreement, a vibratory handshake. Thoughts are matter. Guilt and remorse can paralyze and attract negative forces, which links to additional problems and issues. Exorcism doesn't completely work because the cause of an obsession may not be resolved permanently for both the obsessor and the obsessed. The approach to resolve must be not an extreme measure, but a balanced way should be used with educated intentions and great care. We give thanks to the spiritual benefactors, the good spirits, for guiding us and inspiring us today. May we receive the love, light, and peace of Christ within us, not only for us, but for our loved ones, our directors, our counselors, the mediums, and the workers. We pray for inner peace and especially for world peace, and for those who are suffering in the physical world and the spiritual worlds. We pray for great healing for all who are in need at this time. We pray for SGNY and the Spiritist centers throughout the world, that they may grow, expand, and prosper, and also be protected. As we close, we humbly ask that we go forth in safety and protection as we return to our family, friends, loved ones, and co-workers. May we receive this love unconditionally, and may we give forth as we are able to, and through our charitable means each one of us may have. We go forth now and remind ourselves to be beacons of light, of love, of peace, and of service. So be it. Thank you.